Hi everyone, Magnus here, and today's video we're going to be looking at an amazing game that was just played between Grandmasters Praggnanandhaa and Abhimanyu Mishra. This was just a really impressive game by both sides. Very good attacking spirit on the white pieces, and also just excellent defending from Mishra. So let's see how the game went. Started with pawn to e4, e5, fairly normal stuff. Knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board. A6 is standard response, kicking away the bishop. If the bishop was to take the knight, then you would take back with the d pawn, and after this capture in the center, you can respond with queen to d4, and you would win back your pawn. So that doesn't happen. We get the standard move, bishop a4, knight to f6, castles, b5 kicking the bishop back to b3, and bishop c5. I think this is known as the Archangel's variation. Was popularized, I think, by Fabi. But now the pawn comes to c3, d6, d4, bishop to b6. This is all known stuff. Castles, rook e1, supporting the pawn a little bit more. Probably going to look to reposition this knight at some point, bring out the bishop, and decide what you're going to do in the center. Rook goes to e8, doing a similar thing, both sides being very patient at the moment. Bishop goes out to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. h6, bishop h4, retreating. Bishop comes to b7. Now we've got this nice bishop pair pointing down at the white king. Queen comes up to d3. I think this is quite a rare move. I don't know that this has ever been played. Just a couple games in the database, as you can see. 4 games clearly have been played. But now after knight to a5, this is a new move, but it's also a fairly normal move. I believe in the Columbus variation, you'll see a lot of knight to a5 and pawn to c5. It is a fairly reasonable and known idea, but this move is also a novelty. Bishop now drops back to c2. Potentially, if this e-pawn were to ever leave the board, you would have some ideas of checkmate. Now g5, very aggressive move, very confrontational from Mishra. Looking to attack this bishop here and ask, are you interested potentially, or pretty much forcing Pragg to take the g-pawn here, and after a recapture there will be a pin, but at the same time white will be sacrificing the piece. As you can see, this is the only move though getting a brilliancy for Pragg. And now after captures, the queen is going to be sliding into g3. There's all kinds of rook lift ideas. This knight can try and get to f5 as well. Could be a huge danger for the black pieces, which all seem kind of stranded on the queen side. King to g7 though is an extremely accurate move. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The idea is that you want to get the rook into the game, and at the same time you're overprotecting this knight, so that potentially you're a little bit more free later. And on moves like queen to g3 that might be coming, instead we get the patient knight to d2. If the queen were to come to g3, there would actually be knight to h5, a brilliant response. And the idea is that if the queen goes to g4, you actually just get a draw by repetition after knight to f6 and queen to g3. So this king to g7 and this entire line, potentially starting with pawn to g5, might have been a bit of a silent draw offer by Mishra, but Pragg is uninterested in this draw and instead decides to try and play for the win with the move knight d2, going for knight to f3, knight to h4, and knight f5. Queen goes to c8. This is apparently a mistake, even though it makes a lot of sense. The idea is you're unpinning the knight, trying to go knight h7 and king to h8 to bring your rook into the game. I think this move seems very natural, but after queen to g3, apparently white is now firmly in the driver's seat, and I can definitely see why you'd want to play the white pieces here. Huge attack on the black king, looks very dangerous. Knight comes to h7, attacking the bishop. Now Mishra wants to try and hide the king in the corner. Instead, we get a capture in the center, pawn captures, and bishop to e7. I think the point of bishop to e7 is that Pragg didn't want the black king to try and run away to f8 and e7. He wants to keep it boxed in on the king side, and it also forces this insane-looking move, king to h6. The black king just completely bare by itself on the rim of the board. However, there aren't really any white pieces that can come in and checkmate. This knight on h7, an absolute hero, guarding these critical squares here. And if you were to deliver a check, the king would simply move back, and once again, you would be making a draw by repetition. But Pragg plays this excellent move, knight to f3, keeping the initiative burning. Now knight to h4 and knight to f5 is coming, so if you were to take here, the game would in fact be over after knight to h4, knight to f5 is unstoppable, and as Gary Kasparov would say, that knight on f5 is worth at least a pawn, and that knight is definitely worth more than a pawn there. Now, however, Mishra plays this great move, queen to e6, trying to get the queen back into the defense, and potentially now looking to capture this bishop. Apparently, the only move here for Pragg to keep the game going was actually knight takes e5 in the center. I guess going for knight to g4 and trying to open up this bishop on the diagonal here and to keep the attack burning. Instead, he goes for knight to h4, which looks like a very nice little tactic. The idea being that if you're going to take the bishop, then knight to f5 comes and is devastation. You'd have to give up the queen and you would lose the game. But I'm guessing he might have just overlooked the strength, possibly not the move itself, rook g8. I doubt that he overlooked that. But after queen to f3 and king g7, another great find by Mishra. The idea is that he's trying to go back to the h8 square and hide his king. This is super cold-blooded defensive stuff from Mishra here. Very, very impressive. Knight comes into f5, king to h8, and the king finds shelter. Rook comes to the center. Mishra brings his rook to the center, attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats. Knight comes into c4. Bishop to v3, pinning the knight. And the bishop comes to c5. I'm going to go a little bit further, faster through these moves as we get towards some more interesting stuff. At the moment, white does still have a pretty long-term initiative. White has 2 pawns for the piece, and black still has a fairly weak king, as well as slightly discombobulated pieces on the queen side. But a couple more logical moves that are considered inaccuracies. I'm not really sure exactly what the rook e2 is doing. Maybe he wants to play rook a2 at some point, but the bishop comes back, attacking the white knight. We get a capture here, captures, and another capture on d6, forcing the pawn to capture. But as more pieces come off the board, Mishra's position gets even better because the pieces will be relatively worth much more when there are less on the board. Now, there is this slight pawn weakness here, which Pragg tries to gang up on and attack. But after this great move, rook e6, this pawn is nicely guarded. Pawn to g4, trying to stop this f5 break potentially. And now rook to e2, guarding the pawn. But f5 gets played anyway. This is very nice. Now there's been a pin set up on the queen and another pin down on the king. f5 is played. The impossible move, which Pragg had set up all his pawns to try and stop, has now been played. And when an impossible move gets played, that's when you know you're in a little bit of trouble. Queen takes on f5, and after queen takes, the only move, rook to h6, gets played, attacking the bishop and skewering to the pawn. The rook comes up to e3, and actually, oops, sorry about that. I just lost that for a second. Oh wait, a little bit of a spoiler there. After the move, rook to h6, the point is that if you move the bishop out of the way, then even worse than that, something like bishop to g3, after rook takes h3, you're actually getting checkmated on the h1 square, which is just absolutely terrible. This bishop on c6 is so strong, slicing up the white position here. But now, so actually, Pragg just decides it might be time to give up this bishop. There is nothing more to really do. The bishop falls off. Now he's got to find. Now Mishra has to find a nice square. He picks a8, nicely defended by the rook in the back. King comes up to h2, trying to hold on, but now knight to g5, another accurate move, looking to try and support an attack on the king with the last pieces from black. Now the tables have turned. It's time for black to strike back. As you can see, like Mishra recoiling up, like turtling up, and then striking back as soon as he's ready. Very nice play. Bishop comes into f3. Now the h3 pawn cannot be defended. So the rook sacrifices itself. And it looks like the king is actually getting a fork here. But there is this really nice find. Pawn to e4, guarding the knight. And now this knight protects the rook, which then pressures the king. And this other rook can now go in and take care of business, which it does fairly swiftly, taking care of business. And now this move, rook to e4, there's actually a really, really nice tactical defense here to rook to e4. If you first get a couple checks, some more checks, checks around, and eventually, when rook to e4 does get played, I'm sure both players were seeing this, which is why Pragg was hesitating so much. There is, of course, rook to h3 and knight g5 would be to follow with a fork. Of course, this gets found. Very nice, sacrificing the rook. And this other move, very, very nice again. Like, these moves are just, they're so accurate. The point is that the rook now sees through the other one, so you still can't take. This move would be a check. And after this rook to e6 check, the point is that this checking square is still on the fork. So the rook cannot escape the forkable squares. The king simply goes back to d7, and Pragg decides to resign as his position is looking completely hopeless here. This endgame is simply a win. There are way too many pieces. I can show it fairly briefly. After something like here, this would be a really easy win for the black pieces because the king is just too close. The king will get behind the pawns, so something like this, let's say something like this, the king simply invades, collects all the pawns, and the game ends. So really, really nice, cold-blooded defensive play from Mishra here. Difficult game for Pragg. Hopefully he can come back in round 2 of the Classical. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will be having some more coverage of the Biel Chess Festival soon. So see you guys next time. Bye.